Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the third album from James Blake, called The Color in Anything. So on Billboard Breakdown earlier last week, when I was covering Beyonce's Forward, the collaboration interlude she made with PBR&B and post-dubstep artist James Blake, it was implied by somebody that I'd like to see James Blake drop a new album sometime in the near future. And while that is definitely true, I started trying to dissect why in my own mind, because he's not often an artist that I would actively seek out, but one that I'm happy exists all the same. His brand of moody yet soulful, atmospheric electronic R&B can be surprisingly compelling, albeit more for the performance than a lot of the content, and we'll get to why. I'll let James Blake's biggest strength shine through in a lot of the subtlety and the details. And while I never really loved his self-titled album or his 2013 sophomore release Overgrown, they were both albums that I found myself revisiting to try and extract more, really plumb their depths. So little did I expect that James Blake would seemingly follow up on my hidden thoughts and drop a record with no warning whatsoever. Now, as much as I like to say that I called this, and as much as I would like to further test my precognitive powers, in reality it's probably just a matter of good timing, I suppose. After all, for the first time in his career, James Blake has landed a featuring credit on the Hot 100 thanks to f.o.r.e.v.e.r. So why not push that moment of hype even further with the long-teased third album, The Color in Anything? But on a similar note, I was a little bit concerned that this release might be overshadowed by louder or more famous albums, especially when hours later, Radiohead of all people announced they were releasing an album this last Sunday. And yes, I'll be getting to them, but they've got to wait. I've got a schedule. And that's not considering this album itself, which running over an hour is nearly double the length of previous James Blake records. And I was a little bit concerned how well that sort of atmosphere could translate to a longer project. But you know what? Enough dancing around the issue. How did I find the color in anything? Well, here's the thing. When you have someone like James Blake, unless there is a huge leap forward in songwriting or atmosphere or melody, any differences in quality between his albums can be fairly small. That said, The Color in Anything is a little bit tricky to evaluate. In terms of individual songs, it has easily some of his best in terms of writing and production. But by the law of averages, it also has produced some of his worst. And I can't be the only one who feels that the length of this album doesn't really do it a lot of favors. And yet, with that being said, I can't say that I didn't enjoy this album on some level. The sort of blissed out, misty music that manages to remain compelling enough in the production and delivery to keep pulling me through. Something which, say, Drake's Views, an album that you could definitely argue was trying to cultivate a similar sort of chill yet emotionally driven atmosphere, couldn't really pull off. In other words, I think this is a good album, but not quite a great one, at least for me. So let's start off with James Blake himself. And while there will be moments where he sounds a little bit like Sam Smith, if you're looking for the closest mainstream comparison, he's always been a much more emotive and complex performer, capable of stately elegance, but also moments that are plaintive and emotive and powerful. There isn't nearly the same stiffness in his liquid delivery, helped by production that really gives him a lot of space to really breathe. And while I'd always prefer more harmonies and multi-tracking, he's got a knack for really rich vocal harmonies and arrangements that always feels a little bit underserved. The one song where he actually tilts into that is the closer, Meet You in the Maze, where most of it is spoiled by gratuitous vocal effects. And while I've accepted this is part of James Blake's production style, I can't say it's always executed as well as it could be on this album, and really only serves to emphasize the distance that has hurt his intimate and subtle songwriting since his early work. It does come together a little bit more on the 808s and heartbreak-esque tones that Put That Away and Talk to Me, but I've always thought he sounded a lot better on the intimate pieces like Forever or the gorgeous and heartbreaking title track, or even the stately swell of Waves No Shores. But you know what? The pitched up opening of My Willing Heart or the squawking fragments throughout Choose Me, or that annoying looped piece on Noise Above Our Heads of the stuttered title word of Always, they just do not flatter his vocal tone whatsoever. Now, much of this is also a factor of the instrumentation and production. And here's the thing, when you have such a straightforward setup, sparse piano and synths and programmed percussion and a thick cushion of reverb, you've got to pay attention to subtleties to notice any sort of shift. But the odd thing is that right from the first track, with the trap hi-hat and the much thicker squealing synth line, you get the impression that this is James Blake's loudest project to date without quite being the biggest. Now, this might seem like a bit of a contradiction, but much of this has to tie into the atmosphere. For as much as the vocals have a lot of room to really swell and breathe and occasionally have some of the mid-range percussion or pianos, the sharper trap percussion is nearly always very close to the front of that mix, which places a much sharper boundary on the sound that Blake was able to create on Overgrown. But more than that, with a choice to go for more blaring, klaxon-like synths that are warbling across the mix, these tracks are thicker but also a lot closer to the ear. And sure, nearly all of it has some great texture. Take the drums against the subtle swells on Timeless effortless are the glassy melodies of Put That Away and Talk to Me that play off the whirring percussion surprisingly well, the subtle horns on Waves No Shores, the beautiful misty blur of I Need a Forest Fire featuring f.o.r.e.v.e.r playing off James Blake really well, the distant clatter of the metallic drums against the faded pianos in the first half of Modern Soul. These are all great moments, but contrast that with the synths on I Hope My Life that could have been pulled from a Depeche Mode song, or the burbling deep house tendencies of Noise Above Our Heads, or the stuttering ring on Two Man Down against what sounds like brighter synths, or the rattling hand claps against the pitched up vocals on Always. And you could tell that James Blake is playing for what is typically now considered a more accessible sound. And I hate to say it, but it doesn't really flatter James Blake's skill set. Many of these tracks aren't rooted in a strong melodic hook and are more abstract, free-floating pieces. They aren't exactly pop songs, and thus they can lack momentum when they're going for that more conventional production sound. And nearly all these tracks run long. This record is a long 17 tracks as it is. Thanks to the generally low-key vibe and Blake's ambivalence towards momentum, this record can definitely drag on the back half, especially right after the incredibly powerful title track. He just wasn't going to top that song. This record could have ended right there. But to explain why that is, we have to talk about lyrics and themes. Now, I've been very critical of James Blake in the past here. I can respect how well his simple brand of writing can translate to subtle nuance, but there's a peculiar facet to his writing that seems to directly act against the sense of intimacy that he's trying to cultivate. And the best way I can describe it is if James Blake doesn't feel like a primary actor in his own relationship drama. The girls might change, the situation might evolve, but James Blake himself seems to remain the same or not take a lot of action, which has a certain consistency but can make me feel a little bit distant from his emotional pain, especially as his feelings that drive the emotional through line of his records. Now, that doesn't really change here. Songs like Points are prime examples as the girl changes and that causes the relationship to fall apart, but what I like is how James Blake is now more aware of his own inertia. And while there are moments where he tries to break free of it, Put That Away and Talk to Me is the best example as he tries to fight free of a weed-induced stupor, and I Need a Forest Fire shows on some level he has to crave action to restart things. Where this album gets interesting is when he tilts into that inaction, more into that inertia. For some example, Love Me in Whatever Way shows him getting taken along the path towards expansion, along with the warning that he's not going to be able to easily correct his course. Or take the fading scene of Radio Silence, where the breakup proceeds in slow motion, and while he's in a lot of pain, the deadening feel of inevitability is creeping through regardless. Now that's arguably where we run into a bit of an issue with the writing. And the tone is not smug, but for as self-assured as James Blake is, his lack of activity on some of these tracks can hit a bit of a detached note that doesn't help him appear all that sympathetic, especially on some of these songs where he's trying for more emotive presence. We want to sympathize with him, but he's pushing us away. However, by far the best song, the title track, as James Blake tries to hold together a relationship with someone that seems to have depression, who can't see the color in anything. And for as much as he wants to help, for as much as he loves this girl and would love to carry her past her pain, he really can't help her in the way that she needs. And there's drama here in not being able to take action. Easily one of his best ever songs. I'd recommend this album on this song's strength alone. It really is amazing. But as a whole, look, I don't know. I do like this album a fair bit, but I'm still not convinced that James Blake has made his atmospheric masterpiece just yet. The songwriting and vocal delivery is improving, but this album could have been tightened significantly with a fair few cuts, and the production didn't need to go as broad and conventional as it did. I'd argue James Blake is in a bit of a weird spot right now. Certainly influential in the mainstream and working with superstars that have the budget and clout to push him over the top, but James Blake himself isn't really making mainstream accessible music. I don't know if he ever will or if he even wants to. As it is, for me this is a light 7 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation if you're a fan of the guy, but I'd check out pieces of it over listening to the entire thing as a whole, because it definitely runs a lot longer than it probably should. That said, James Blake's comeback is considerable and welcome, and there are some really great songs here, so yeah, definitely take a look. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. What did you guys think of this album? I know it ran long and it is a little bit more conventional. I can imagine this album might be divisive for some hardcore James Blake fans, so I got the poll up here so you guys can tell me what you think. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. My schedule is overflowing at the moment, and yes, Radiohead fans, you're gonna have to wait a bit. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.